easy work. And when they did the remake for Piranha and they showed the commercials, it was Richard Dreyfuss sitting in a little fishing boat singing the iconic song from Jaws. And I'm like, this is going to be an amazing movie. And Jill didn't want to go see it because she likes to swim, and you can't swim and watch movies like Piranha or Jaws. But I promised her that I'd go to one of her movies if she'd go to Piranha with me. And that movie was so terrible. And she's like, you owe me. I'm like, all right, fine. I'll go see Frozen with you, which is a win for me because I loved Frozen.
I got even with him. I made him go 7 times.
In fairness, most of the time it was like, when Frozen came out, it got so hot that every convention we went to that we had a helper, they're like, I want to go, have you seen Frozen? I really want to see Frozen. So to help pay off our helpers, we'd take them to Frozen and not tell them that we'd already seen it 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. And I don't think Jill would have done that for Piranha. And I know she wouldn't have done it for Piranha 3 Double D. If you were going to record this, let me move the clock so it's moving your way.
Okay.
Put it over here and hide product because I'm not sponsored. I'm not getting paid by Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
I'd like to. If for nothing else, volume discount.
Yeah, also, I enjoyed Piranha 3D for what it was.
Oh, good. The Knights who say knee.
Yay! Yay!
Oh, God. Now we're going to start that.
You did it.
That's still got to be better than everybody chanting one of us when I walk into it. That's mostly Onicon.
Yeah, but it's Chicago now, too.
That's because you talk too much.
Or any kind of the cards can say anything.
Yeah, but they kind of caught on to it at Onicon, where they start chanting one of us during opening ceremonies when I get introduced. And this is a mostly grown-up crowd, so when I make this motion, you've played Cards Against You. One of the cards, and I can say this because none of the words are making the penis's kiss. Okay, that got played at Anime Central. And nobody was really laughing that much. And I'm like, I can just see, because it was a pick 2 and Jill was involved with dragging people closer together, like promoting unity or something by making, and I'm like, I can just see that. And I did that, and my wife picked up on it and went, one of us. And it became the worst thing ever, because then it was spreading all over main events during opening ceremonies, and people are like, what are they doing? I'm like, it's an updated version of this. It's for martial arts. But not really.
Now you know.
Now you can start recording. But don't leave, I haven't started yet. Aww. They're not one of us. They could have been 2 of us. All right, we're going to let that go, but you have a night. Put the helmet on so nobody knows who you are. Stand at the door, and if anybody leaves, chop them down.
Dan, please don't. He's joking.
I have to be careful saying that stuff. The dojo I teach at, teenagers have an unfortunate tendency of trying to be smart alecky or smug. So, like if you're in 7th grade and you have a teacher that you don't really like, during the school year, he's Mr. Robertson. But when you see him at Walmart after you get moved into 8th grade and you'll never have to put up with that guy again, you walk by and you go, hey Bill, what's up? Because it makes you feel like, he's no longer an authority. Martial arts students do that. And I'm not a person that's hung up on titles at all. I expect you to call me, my stage name is Samuari Dan. I teach samurai arts for a living, and my first name is Dan. I went out on a limb for that. But at the dojo, when I'm teaching, it's important that the students recognize authority so they know whose voice to listen to. Kind of like the dogs. If you say, come here, and Kiba's supposed to be standing by me, he's supposed to recognize me. So at the dojo, it is sensei. I've spent 35 years earning that, and sensei just means, for martial arts, it means teacher. The term actually means one who's gone before. So it actually translates more as guide than teacher, but I had a teenage student that he trained for like 6 years in my dojo, and then he quit because a teenager, he's 16, got a job, got a girlfriend, got a national weather advisory. It kind of sounded like that. I'm like, is there a tornado? We're in Texas.
Last night it was an Amber Alert.
Yeah, we got.
Yeah, you're in Texas, expect to get a lot of
Really?
Amber Alerts. You get used to it.
They're constant.
Let's go find who took them. Sorry. Oh, I just stepped on my dog. And he moved. Well, yeah, he was clear out here in my
He
defense.
keeps trying to pull your table.
So I have this teenage student, and he quit training, but his little sister was still training. So he'd show up and pick her up. And so he walked into my dojo, and I'm on the floor teaching class, and he walks in, and hey, you ready to go, Lorelei? Let's go. What's up, Dan? And the whole school just went quiet. And I had another teenager who was standing right off the floor, and I went, Ryan. And I was trying to be silly, and I expected Ryan to just turn and say, look, you don't treat sensei that way. That's disrespectful to the art. Ryan was incensed for 45 generations of samurai instructors all being dissed. This kid turned around and went, bam! Back fist, and floored him down to the floor. And he got back up and he goes, I'm sorry, sensei, I won't do that again, and left. And I'm like, I am so gonna get killed by his dad.
Did you?
Oh my God, no. Jeremy came in, he brought Lorelei in for class the next day, and he goes, so I've got to tell you, my son has a red mark on his cheek. And I'm like, yeah, let me explain. And he goes, no, thank you. I'm like, I didn't even do it. Which is good, because if I would have belted my 16-year-old student like that for bad conduct, I would have probably not been here today to teach self-defense or lecture about swords, because I'd still be in jail where the people I'd be hitting are bigger and outnumber me. But no, having another teenager who's actually like 6 months younger, yeah, you got dropped by my 15-year-old. Maybe you should have kept training. Did I say that out loud? Okay, so this panel, I'm so sorry. We just had a panel and ran to get lunch and supplies, and I ate as I was walking here.
Another shark cat.
And as long as you're recording, I want to make sure you know, if you see things flying at the camera from my mouth, it's because I ate on my way here. You're in the third row. You're probably safe. My distance record for spitting has never made it to the fourth row. I can throw things, but... All right, this panel is real sword or piece of crap. Some conventions actually do not let me teach this panel because it sounds offensive, and that they feel like the sword vendors at conventions will not be happy that I teach it. And I let that myth go on because some of you will show up just because of that. But the truth is, the sword vendors that are at anime cons love me doing this panel because you have a little bit of education and a lot of spending money. And when you combine those two things, they make more money. Because we're going to go over the difference between what should just be a wall decoration and what's something that you could actually use to get through the zombie apocalypse. Or at least seven or eight seasons of The Walking Dead, whichever comes first. And so vendors, actually I have the vendor that's here now several years ago. I'm like, what is wrapped around my neck? Something's killing me. And it would be my wife's blonde hair.
It could be a shark cat.
Those, did you get those here or did you make them or something?
We had to put them together, yes.
Those are
You make that sound like I'm not mechanically sophisticated enough
We
to
just
put
got
that
them
together.
from- we just-
I can do the pirate hat from Long John Silver's and
We just
stuff.
got them from H-E-B and like put pieces of them together.
those are
Because those are awesome.
Thanks.
I don't know, if somebody had a family member that got attacked by a shark, they might be triggered. And
We
we're
were
at a
talking
point,
about Jaws earlier.
I know, we're at a point in our civilization that anything you say can trigger somebody. But, and that's this panel, real sword or piece of crap. Some of the conventions that have let us do it have insisted on changing the title. Anime Central in Chicago, that runs about 25,000, lets me do this panel, but they had to change the name to Real Sword or Piece of Junk. Because apparently junk is not a triggering word where crap is. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is.
fail.
No, we're not interested in fair. Be quiet. The fun part about this panel, though, is we are going to go over those differences in a way that even the most completely sword, forgive the word, ignorant just means unlearned. It does not mean learning disabled. Even the most ignorant person can walk out of this panel with checkpoints on what to look for on whether or not this is a decent sword or whether it's a wall decoration. And when we go over this panel and I say, piece of crap, that's just an attention getter. If you want to buy a wall decoration sword, by all means, buy a wall decoration sword. I have several because if they're sharp and they're shiny and they're pointy, I like them. They don't have to be $10,000 swords. They can be $20 swords. The point of the panel is for you to be able to recognize the difference between a $20 sword and a $10,000 sword. And that's what got us in trouble. This panel is a result of what we were just talking about. The $12,000 master sword that was a mass-produced $70 blade. Yeah, while we're talking about this, one of the first conventions I did as a guest performer, there was someone in the dealer room who was had a big sword booth and was trying to sell a sword that was a $12,000 master sword. First of all, master sword is not a Japanese term. If you're in martial arts, the martial arts scene, using the term master is more often associated with Korean martial arts like Taekwondo and Kumdo. Japanese terms don't usually use that. So that was point number one. It is a Japanese sword vendor selling master sword. But I try not to bother people doing their own thing. So I was walking by and the guy stopped me and said, "Hey, you look like you know something about swords." Like, a little. And usually for Japanese culture, the more you know, the more you pretend like you don't know anything. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm on my, well, look at this. This is a $12,000 sword, handmade by a master. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, but no, it's not. And he's like, oh, yes, it is. And I'm like, it's not. When I said I know a little bit about Japanese swords, what I meant to say was, I teach Japanese sword for a living, and I lecture around the country on historical Japanese blades, and that's not a $12,000 sword. And he got offended, and he got mad, and he said, what do you mean? I said, for one thing, Ito, that's the wrap on the sword. Ito runs about $8 a foot at the time. And to wrap the handle, the rule of thumb is you take the number of inches the handle is long, just change it, the designation to feet. So if you have a 9-inch handle, you need 9 feet plus 4. So you need 13. And cheaper swords, they use what looks like hockey.
Laces?
No, not tape, the shoelaces. Because it comes on a spool. And it works for wrapping swords. We have a couple blades that are wrapped in that. It costs 8 cents a foot. And I'm like, you wouldn't sell a $12,000 sword with 8 cents a foot Ito. And furthermore, the Suba, that's the handguard that you have on there, is a modern reproduction from Henway Forge, and it wholesales for $17.50. He's like, you're just making this up. I'm like, no, I have an account. And he tried to get me fired from the convention by saying that I didn't know what I was talking about. And I heard his pitch when I walked away, because he was screaming and swearing, which is usually a good indication that he's right. Because when you get loud, I mean, the louder if we're having a discussion and your voice keeps getting louder and your language use keeps going more towards profane, you're probably not the one that's right. But we'll talk about the House and Senate later. Sorry, that's as political as I get. They're all wrong. I started to walk away and I saw him go to somebody else and he was talking to a guy. He said, look, the $12,000. Now I know what you're thinking. You didn't come to the convention to buy a $12,000 sword. I mean, it's a great blade, but that's not what you were planning on. So look, I want you to look at this. See it? Yeah, okay, let me set this down. I have another sword made by the exact same smith, and it's only $600. And I'll bet you can't even tell the difference. It's a master quality sword. And he gets out another sword and holds it up. They are the same. They have a different tsuba. The handguard's different. It's a different $17.50 reproduction tsuba, because you can't even tell the difference. This one's only $600. You know why I couldn't tell a difference? It literally was the same blade. I found the vendor online, and the blades, if you buy them in bulk, are $70 a piece. And he wasn't expecting to sell a $12,000 sword. What he was doing was using it to leverage you to buy a $600 sword. And he screwed up by complaining to the convention about me because it meant they had to investigate. Guess who got hired back the next year? Guess who got banned from ASIN for 10 years? But this panel, we're going to go over some of the easy tells. And what it does for most sword vendors, they like it, because if you come in and well, this is only Friday, you still have money left. Some of you have already been to the dealer room or eaten lunch here at the, I told her I was all incensed about that breakfast price, and she's like, well, they had gratuity, it's normal. I'm like, this is why she doesn't let me see a menu. No. I was commiserating with you, not giving you floor space. I have an easy rule. Talk to me after the panel. If you have questions, yes. Commentary, you can put that online while you're oh no, I was kidding. Don't actually do that. Most sword vendors like the fact that I do this panel, because you go in, instead of spending $50 for a wall decoration, for a little bit more, you can actually get a real sword that will survive the zombie apocalypse and take out not just your roommate, but all the other people on the floor if they start foaming at the mouth. And so it increases their sales. So I am not against the vendors. I want people to have swords. Are you kidding? I teach this stuff for a living. I want all of you armed. Maybe not looking at me as hostile as you are now. I was at a con once and I dreamed the zombie apocalypse broke out during this panel. And I had all these swords up here, and the convention attendees outside of the room were all turning into zombies, and I'm like, here, you take this sword, you take this one. And then we kicked out the doors and we went to retake the hotel, but we were at an anime con and we couldn't tell who'd changed and who was just in costume. So we killed them all. Don't judge me, it was just a dream. I just want to be able to use skills and not feel guilty about it, because that's most of what I train in, is all I hope I never have to use this. But this we can do. Swords fall into 3 categories. Category number 1 is a souvenir, a collectible. You're at the con. Now it's Sunday. You've got $25 burning a hole in your wallet, or your purse, or your toast.
Don't mess with my toast.
Aww, so cute.
Just toast. When she said she was going to go get me toast, I thought that meant I was getting something to eat.
What do you mean toast?
She's getting that bread.
Also known as my paycheck. Yeah, that's right. So you got $25 left in your wallet, and you go hit the dealer room that one last time, and there's either this really cool BA sword. See, I didn't swear. Up on the wall, or a 5th Pikachu pillow. And really, the first 4 did not enhance your social life. And that sword might just increase your cool factor with your friends. So you buy a sword. And there is no problem with that. But if you're going to buy a souvenir, a decoration, remember 2 things. Number 1, pay for it like it's a decoration. And number 2, treat it like a decoration. We'll circle back to that quickly. But category number 2 for Japanese swords is a usable sword. The Japanese term is shinken, or real sword. Shinken is something that will get you through the zombie apocalypse, and it was designed for contact and surviving said contact. Category number 3 is an investment sword. That's a real sword that has a history, and you don't buy it because you just have to be able to make that draw and cut through the map. You buy it because it's worth $10,000 today, and next year at this time you expect it to be worth $15,000. For a long time, Japanese swords were an easy investment to make because our country was kind of flooded with Japanese swords at the end of World War II. It's estimated that 199,000 Japanese swords, I don't know why that's the estimate, not just 200,000, but 199,000 blades made their way into this country. And 80% of those blades were made during World War II. So they're valuable, but they're not hugely valuable. And you think 20% is not very much, but when you do the math, and I won't make you word a con, I'm here for you. That's almost 40,000 blades that were older, that predate World War II, that have history and lineage and can become very valuable. And it's really hard to determine price on that without knowing the smith and the history and things like that. But every sword that's in category number 3 is also in category number 2. It falls into real sword, shinken. So you'll still want to look for these same parts. Okay? And I mentioned before, if you buy a decorator sword, I am all for it. They look cool. You can bring it up to me in the hallway, preferably not menacing me with it. Don't laugh, it's happened. I had some kid in Kansas City attack me with 2 knives because he was teaching dual wielding in the hallway. And when the con asked if I could help calm him down, he attacked me with them. Didn't last very long. He was
Well, you were nice to him when he menaced you, and then
really cool. I'm like, you can't pose like that from this range. That's Arabian stuff from a distance with swirling movements. We're in a hallway. I always do that when people try to attack me. Start lecturing them and explaining why they're wrong. And he went after me, and I had one up against his throat and his arm pinned with the other one in a really uncomfortable place for him, and holding him, going, are we going to calm down now? You should just let me have these. And staff is like, how did you do that? I'm like, I have no idea. I've never done it before. Just, it's what he did. Anyway, real sword or piece of crap. If you buy a decoration sword, I mentioned, don't overpay for it. Unless it's a movie souvenir, it's actually the sword that... Well, you guys are anime fans. They don't have actual swords from cartoons. If they do, I want to see that blade. But like movie swords, The Hobbit, and this was the one that he actually carried, you know, that kind of thing, that has value beyond what the materials cost is. But if you buy a decoration sword, don't overpay and use it as a decoration. If you buy something to go on the wall, do not take your sword home, grab a friend with a video phone and a bunch of lumber and go out in the backyard and start hacking things up. If you do that, you will deserve the 15 minutes of YouTube infamy that is coming. Okay? And when I say that, it's happened. And not just on, I'm a 13-year-old teenager with money and no supervision. Has anybody seen the TV show? It's a live show, QVC, Shop at Home Network. It's still on. All right. Almost 10 years ago, QVC was selling a set of Japanese swords. I do not remember how much they were selling them for. I know the hard part for you trying to videotape and not watch while you eat and multitask. I move. Not a lot, but I want to make sure that he has to move his head a little bit because, and the eyes. It's a trick to keep your attention because we have become so ADD. If I don't move, you're going to mentally start changing the channel and start looking at your phone. If you know I'm armed and moving around and you don't know anything else about me, you'll pay attention. Because you don't know my impulse control. You do, and that's why you have a shark on your head. QVC was selling a set of 3 swords. I don't remember what they were selling them for, but in the Bud Cake catalog that does closeout knives, it was $19.99 for all 3 blades and the sword rack, the stand that they came on. And $19 doesn't pay for the lumber to make a decent quality cherry wood or anything else. Katana kake sword stand. So you can guess these were probably not the ultimate zombie apocalypse weapons. But this guy was hawking the blades on QVC, and he took the longsword, drew it out, put the scabbard back on it, and he started smacking the flat of the blade on the table because he was demonstrating how strong the blade was for a decoration sword. Okay, you can't do that. Murphy is watching. And his roommate Darwin's going, yep, he's out. This guy is on, and QVC is recorded live. I mean, so when you watch it, it's a recording, but they have an audience. So this guy is mic'd up, and he's got the sword, and he's like, now the best thing about this blade is its durability. And he smacked it on the table. The blade snapped near the hilt, flew up and caught him right here, just inside the right pectoral. And I said it was recorded live, so he dropped behind the table, just disappeared from, but he's still mic'd. You can hear him going, oh, yeah, that got me good. And some other guy comes over to try to cover it, and he's like, so, and he looks down, looks back, so I guess we'll be having an ambulance today at the QVC. And if you buy a decoration, if you're gonna put it on the wall, why would you smack it on the table? If you go and get your first apartment and go, I need some artwork for my wall, because when you're little, you put up movie posters, and when you're bigger, you either put up movie posters in a frame to show you're sophisticated, or you get a picture. But if you went to an art gallery and went, I need a picture for my wall, if the art vendor starts smashing the picture around to demonstrate its virtue, you're not gonna buy from there, you're gonna leave. I mean, can you imagine? Now the best thing about the Mona Lisa, she can take a pounding. That is not what I...
Yeah! The paper cuts, let's go!
That is not quite how I meant that. But yeah, the first time I made that joke, it was a complete, I was irate about the idea of smacking that sword. And I didn't plan it, I just said that, and I didn't know what I said. Everybody started laughing, it just got quiet again. And some girl went, well, that explains the smile, and I lost the room. There was no panel after that. All anybody wanted to do is talk artwork. And smacking things, I guess. But you're not going to do that with a decoration. So if you're going to get a decoration, please treat it as a decoration and not as the Mona Lisa smile. Okay? So let's talk about real swords. If you get a sword, oh, and for what it's worth, I believe in show and tell. Show and tell is a lot more fun than just a lecture. So I brought props with me that I will show at various points. That point, it's a sword joke. Real sword or piece of crap. This is easy. There's going to be 5 points to this, where you're going to walk out of here, and I didn't tell you there's a quiz. You can't leave unless you pass. You got to get 4 out of the 5 points, because studies have shown in an hour presentation, no matter how much information's there, if you don't write it down, you'll remember 4 items. And unfortunately, you've already clicked into 1 being the Mona Lisa joke. So we'll be lucky if we can get 3. There are 5 points to this. Step number 1, real sword or piece of crap. Somebody brings you a sword and says, hey, you want to buy this? First thing you do, ask how much. But I want you to take the blade out carefully. Japanese swords are sharp on one side, not the other. So when you take it out, have the sharp part facing up, because gravity is a thing. Okay? And this will keep you from getting cut easier. Take the cool, shiny part and set it aside. I just heard all the ADD people right there. Point number 1, real sword or piece of crap. If you want to see if it's a real sword or not, set the sword aside, look at the scabbard. The term in Japanese is saya. And I don't use that because there is a quiz. I just do it because I have a big mouth and no filter, and sometimes people think I don't actually know this stuff. I'm just a talking head that does infomercials. Step number 1, real sword or piece of crap. Any sword that was designed and meant to be used, drawn out, cut with, and put away is going to have a wooden sheath. The saya is going to be made out of wood. When I say that, I don't mean the cap. World War II blades had a metal cap that fit on top. And the World War II Army officer sword, the Gunto swords, for any of you history buffs, they were green scabbard and worn edge down. Had metal on the outside to protect them, but on the inside was a wooden sleeve. Okay, if you take the sword out and look at the inside, you should see wood. If it's ABS plastic or metal, it was not meant to be drawn and then put away. The reason why they use wood on the inside is wood is softer than the metal in the blade. and it will allow for poor technique drawing, or if you're under duress, you don't always have time to make that perfect dojo form draw, but you're going to get that sword out fast. Wood won't damage the blade. It'll cut the scabbard before it'll damage the blade, and this part's replaceable. If the sword's no good, you don't have a weapon to protect yourself with. So if it's not a wooden sheath, don't stop looking right away, because every once in a while people will try to rip off sword vendors, because they'll have a bunch of really cool $600 blades and then some $50 decoration blades. And I caught a group doing this at a convention. There were two guys working the con, if you will. One guy went up to the sword vendor who knows his merchandise, started talking to him and leading him away where he couldn't see his booth. And the other guy came up, waited until the hired help for the weekend that's doing it for a paycheck and doesn't know the merchandise, was distracted, took $600 blade out of the scabbard and put it in the saya of the $20 blade. And then put that blade over there in that saya. And then brought the blade up with the $20 saya and the price sticker on it saying $25, and says, I'll buy this. And ripped them off. In that case, I'd like to hurt both of them, because usually the sword vendor is selling you a $200 blade for $600, but that person just ripped them. I hate people sometimes. You can edit that out. I love people. So you won't always, you can stick a scabbard on a sword that it wasn't made for, but it's a good indicator, especially if the blade itself is new. If it's ABS plastic or metal, not intended to be used as a real sword. So step number one, real sword or piece of crap, wooden sheath. Now, step number two, you're behind. Those were supposed to be out before I said that. We're going to set the scabbard aside, and you're going to pick up the sword and ignore the shiny part. Again, it's sad, but we'll get to that. Yeah, I know, I see them right there. Thank you, though. I want you to pick up the sword and ignore that. We're going to look at the handle. If it's a real sword, the handle is also going to be made out of wood. Now, when you look at it from the outside, this has leather, ito, leather wrap over it, and the black material with the diamond shapes on it is same, it's ray skin. Japanese used it much the way American Indians use deer hide as leather. So you really can't tell. So the way to tell if a sword has a wooden handle is you have to take it off. And if you're dealing with a sword vendor and they're selling blades, especially if it's an older blade, like a World War II blade, you say, can you take the handle off? If the vendor goes, oh, no, we don't take the handle off. It wasn't meant to come off. Walk away. They're lying. Okay? For the samurai, this was their on their hip weapon, much the same as today we use modern firearms, handguns. And those were meant to be taken apart and serviced by the person who carried them on an easy basis because their life depended on it. And so they make that easy. Don't ask how I know this, but you can field strip a Glock handgun in 8 seconds with your eyes closed. I have a lot of free time. I don't even like Glock, but they're meant to be taken apart. Japanese swords are also supposed to be taken apart. If they won't take the handle off for you, you have to walk away because there's important things to look at under there. It's like going to a car dealership. If you went to a car dealership and looked at the car and went, hey, can you open the hood? And the salesman goes, oh, no, you don't open the hood. It wasn't made for that. You're not going to buy the car. You don't know if there's an engine in there or a squirrel cage. With or without squirrel. Sword's the same way. Japanese sword, the handle is held on by makugi. That's the Japanese word for a wooden pin, usually bamboo, that is driven into the blade so that when you hold it, the fatter end, where the entry point, is hidden under your palm. So if it's got 2 pins, the other one should be drilled this way. That way the pins don't come out while you're using the sword. If you find one that the pin's been mounted backwards, you have to be a little more careful with it. But you take the pins out. You remember me harassing her and mocking her? That was partly to get your attention on what she was doing, just long enough to see how easy that was. To take the handle off, there are various ways to do this, but I'm going to demonstrate why your sword vendor should be able to take this off. When you take the pins out, this is the easiest way to take apart a good, solid sword that's not moving at all. Put your left hand in a tight fist grip where there's contact all the way around the handguard, and squeeze. Then take your other hand and you're going to strike the back of your own hand. Not too hard. You do realize that's a nerve point and a disarm for some martial arts. So we're going to hit a little higher, but you're going to hit here while squeezing. I want you to see what happens. Didn't hear it, but watch. See the gap? Okay. I feel like I did something mysterious. My instructor didn't explain it to me. He just did it, and I'm like, how'd you do that? And he goes, harness energy. I'm like, really? So, what you're going to do is you're going to have that smith take the blade and take the handle off. If they can't do it, come see me, I'll do it. But I'll charge you for it. That kind of magic, it draws a lot of energy out. So, now we're going to look at the handle, the ska. Has a metal cap on top, but when you look on the inside, you can see, oh, it's wood. I know we're acting all childish. It's wood. I did this panel in Philadelphia at ZenkaiCon several years ago, and I had a teenage boy raise his hand. He goes, how can you tell if it's wood? I started to laugh and mock him, and I asked him, I was like, where do you live? Because I was going to make a really bad joke about educational standards. And he lives downtown, and the only wood he ever sees, his apartment does not have real wood, borders. It's some plastic stuff. And the only grass he sees is at the baseball diamond that he gets to play on. He has no idea what finished wood looks like. And then I felt like a complete jerk, because in my head I was making fun of him and putting him down. It's like, I'm an Iowa farm kid. I grew up with wood because I got spanked with it a lot. As a child. Just stop. All right, so when you look at the inside, you're going to see that it's made out of wood. If it's ABS plastic or metal or ivory, they make collection swords with ivory handles. They're not meant to be swung hard and fast to hit anything. The reason for that is when you hit something with the blade, I didn't know I had sparkles in here. Pixie dust. I don't remember the rest of that night. If you swing the sword blade and hit it, there is vibration and shock that travels down the blade, and it comes to the end of the blade. And if you're using an ABS plastic or ivory blade, it's going to crack. It'll split and break. And if you're using a metal one, even if it doesn't break, like my Highlander 3 sword did, I love that sword. Had the demon with the folded wings on it. It was awesome. So I obviously I didn't cut with it, but I'd use it to practice forms and stuff. And it wasn't designed for full power forms over and over again. I know that now. It'll ruin the handle, and it'll come apart in your hands. And in a life or death situation, that is no bueno. Okay, so real sword or piece of crap. Point number one, real sword will have a real wooden sheath. Point number two, real sword or piece of crap, it'll have a wooden handle. Now we get to start looking at the fun part. Sort of. Point number three, real sword or piece of crap. Pick up the sharp, shiny part and ignore this part. Look at the bottom. And this is where we're going to start running into vendor terms. And since there's not always a legal definition for them, it's important you know what it means. They're going to throw the term full tang at you. That has nothing to do with the orange drink the astronauts use. The tang is the bottom part of the metal. This is all one piece. And the tang, the Japanese term is nakago. But full tang means that if you wrap your hands around this in the same place that you would put your hands had the handle on, your support hand is going to close on steel. Okay, if it's a half-tang sword, what that means is it's got grip for one hand, and the handle itself extends the full distance, so your bottom hand closes on the handle, and there's no metal underneath it. Okay, if you hit things hard with that, the shock's going to go through, and the handle will break right there. So full tang becomes the first of the really important features on what's a real sword and what's not. Because to save money, they'll make blades that cut off right there, so it's enough to hold that on. They waited until I had the handle off and couldn't chase them. You let them go. Don't listen to her. She's not armed. She's the dangerous one, though. All right. Real sword or piece of crap. Point number 1, wooden sheath. Point number 2, wooden handle. Point number 3, full tang. Your hands need to close. If we have anybody who takes Japanese sword, a lot of times you'll see an instructor take their weapon, the wooden practice sword, the bokken, bakudo, and they'll take their left hand, put their pinky out like this, and set the blade down and close their hand on it, and then try to find a balance point for their handle, and say, that's how you do Japanese sword, because it makes the blade faster. Removing grip strength from a blade is not a good idea. What they're doing is they're misapplying an old technique. It used to be the easy way to tell if the tang was long enough was you took the suka off the handle and then set the nakago on the pinky and closed your hand over it, and then put your dominant hand on the way it's supposed to be, with just this part of your index finger touching it. Because Japanese swordsmanship, they separated their hands by 2 or 3 fingers width. If you see a guy in a movie like this, please remember that's an actor, not a martial arts professional. Anybody remember what Alec Baldwin did a couple of weeks ago? Yeah, don't trust him with swords either. Sorry. Yeah, I went there. I have friends in the industry that are stunt choreographers, and the whole reason why Brandon Lee died in 1994 is because the film company was too cheap to pay Jeff Imada for the last 2 weeks of filming. He was a stunt director and one of Bruce Lee's students, and that was one of Jeff's jobs, was he checked, not just to see if there were blanks in, but to check the barrel to see if anything was wadded in there, because that's not something you normally look at, to look down the barrel. In fact, they kind of teach you not to. But if you're using squibs and nobody checked it and there was something lodged in there, and that's, anyway, how brave I am when I'm armed. Full tang. And that's how you could tell, because you should have at least this much of your hand has to close on steel for the blade to be safe when you have the handle on. We have another instructor in Iowa City. Well, strangely enough, he retired now. But when he came to town, he took us out to dinner and asked me to teach him all of our sword forms so he could use them for his school and compete against me. I'm like, I don't see this upside to that. But he showed me his sword, and it did not have a full tang. It was a half tang. I'm like, you can't cut with that. It's dangerous. And it's like, my instructor sold me this blade, and it's a $1,200 sword. And I'm like, no, it's not. I can show you the ad on the internet. If you buy 5 of them, they're $199 a piece, and you can't cut with them. And he cut with it. We were at a demonstration at the University of Iowa, and he was on right before we were. Cut, and he hit the pin on the stand that you put the mat on, which shouldn't be a big deal with a good sword. But he hit the pin, the handle snapped right in half on stage. Luckily, he held on to this part, but it just kind of all came apart, and he just walked off. Like, if I did that, I probably wouldn't get hired anywhere. Step 1, wooden sheath. Step 2, wooden handle. Step 3, full tang. And now, step 4, we actually get to, you're gonna let me go on first, or you wanna put the handle on? You don't reach like that. That's what happened to my last assistant. You remember, Lefty? Step number 4, real sword or piece of crap. You finally get to start looking at the blade. And this is another term that vendors are going to use. The term is high carbon steel. What designates high carbon? It's actually a term, well, not plastic, but there's a difference between iron and steel, and you have to add other components to it. And Japanese swords that are valuable and real are high carbon steel. High carbon steel does something that stainless steel does not do. The fancy term is it oxidizes. The basic term is it rusts. And stainless steel does not rust. This is World War II naval sword. And it's legit. It was carried by an officer in the Pacific Theater. But when you look at it, you're going to see rust down here. That's not from misuse. That was something that got inside our bath towel. The naval officers, most of their swords, because they weren't going to fight, not a lot of ship-to-ship, hand-to-hand combat like in a Pirates movie in World War II. And salt air is really corrosive on steel. So what the Japanese did is they coated the blades with chrome. Chrome makes bumpers look amazing on 1950s cars, but it's not really designed for sword combat. But chrome doesn't oxidize. So when you wipe down the blades, yeah, it's also soft. You're going to see a little bit of discoloration that came down with whatever got stuck on there, but it doesn't oxidize. High carbon steel oxidizes. See the rust? This is the worst, crappiest sword I've ever seen. Does not have a wooden handle, does not have a full tang, but it does at least have high carbon steel. So if you need this during the zombie apocalypse to stab your roommate with, just in case you want him to die of tetanus years later, this is your blade. This got left behind at a Ren fair one year. The sword vendor, it was in behind his tent. And when he found it the next year, he's like, "Oh, you want that sword?" And I went, "Yep." He's like, "Wait, do I want to let you have that?" Because he knew what I'd do with it. I would show this is not a sword to buy. This is an example of a piece of crap. So, high carbon steel. The clean side of the paper towel. I'm showing you this not because I expect you to not know what white is, but I want you to notice it does not have dirt on it. And high carbon steel oxidizes, and any sword vendor will let you do this because it means you're cleaning the sword off of them. So many of them get packed in cosmoline. It's a kind of grease to keep it from rusting in a shipping container when it's sent from overseas. But high carbon steel oxidizes. See the black on that? There's not a tremendous amount, but the reason why there's not a tremendous amount of black on there is because I cleaned this sword yesterday. And Japanese swords that are good quality are high carbon steel. It means they oxidize. That brings us to point number 5. Point number 1, wooden sheath. Point number 2, wooden handle. Point number 3, full tang. Point number 4, high carbon steel. Point number 5, and our last. When you look at the shiny part, you see the wavy line that runs down it? That's a temper line in English. In Japanese, the term is hamon. And it shows when you make a sword, you work with the steel in its untempered state. That means it's softer because it's easier to shape. But when you have it designed the way you want that edge to be hard enough to keep its shape. So when you start smacking on the knight for not paying attention, and it hits something solid like his helmet or his skull, it holds its edge. Does that make sense? So the Japanese did something different than what most swordsmiths around the world did. They wanted to keep the front of the sword really hard so it would be sharp, but they wanted the back of the sword to be soft enough to absorb impact. Because if you make something really, really hard and it gets way up there on that Rockwell scale of hardness, if you hit something solid, the blade won't bend, but it will shatter. And having a sword fight against him where he has a sword and I have a handle, unless there's a separate switch for a lightsaber coming out, I'm going to lose. Okay? So for the Japanese swordsmiths, what they did, they wanted to keep the edge. So when they got the blade shaped, they took a mixture of ash and clay and put it across the back of the sword. And then they heated it up so it got white hot or orange hot, depending on your school. And they would plunge it in an oil or water bath. If anybody's seen Forged in Fire, okay, that's always the most difficult part of making a sword. If the blade's gonna fail, it's usually during the heat treating, and that's why it breaks later on when they start hitting things. But with the Japanese blade, when they're done, they scrape it all clean and polish it. That line is the demarcation in the steel where it changes its hardness. Good Japanese sword, the edge is gonna run between 58 and 62 on a Rockwell scale. So if you see 58 RK or RW or RKW, that means that's the number, that's how hard the edge is. And the back of the sword's gonna run softer, 45 to 50. If you find a blade that's like 25 on the back, and don't get it. If you go too far, it'll actually bend on the temper line when you hit something solid. And you can't get a warp out of a blade very easy. A bend, yes. A twist, as soon as you hit something, it goes back to it. So, that wavy line, the reason why I explained all that is when you're done heat treating the steel, you polish it so it's all pretty. The last polish, whether it's by hand or by machine, the way they do it is they start going this way, and then once all the really fine scratch marks are running the same direction, they change 90 degrees and they file this way with the hone stones until all the scratch marks now run like this. The final polish always runs this way. So when you look at that sword and you look at the steel, on the back part, you see the little lines that run this way. And from the temper line to the edge, those little marks still run the same direction. Because that's how the sword was polished. All the scratch marks run the same way, above and below that line. That's because they put a real temper line on it. There are factories that make swords really fast and to be decorations. Can you get the red one out?
Yes.
And I'm really sorry, I'm running over, so I can't just run this out. But you can see the lines all run the same way. And thanks for sitting all the way in the back. Well, what that means is the temper line is real. There are swords, they want to fool you and have you think it's a temper line. And so what they do is the steel runs this way, this 440 stainless, and they put the temper line on with an angle grinder. It's usually a bunch of little rolly things. So when you look at it, those lines from the spine to the edge run this way, but if you look at the temper line, see how the scratch marks run this way instead? They put them at a 90-degree angle because it makes it pop so you can see it easier. So from a distance, you can see that temper line. It is out there. And when you get close, you realize those scratch lines run perpendicular. And that means it was put on with an angle grinder, and it's not differentially heat treated. It means it has the same rigidity to the steel all the way through the blade, and therefore is not a shinken or real sword. So, real sword or piece of crap. Step number one, a real sword is going to have a wooden sheath, scabbard, saya. Step number two, point number two, a real sword is going to have a wooden handle. Step number three, real sword has a full. Step number four, high carbon steel. High carbon fiber, who said that? I don't have any high carbon fiber swords, but Batman does. Point number five, real sword is going to have a real temper line. If you can remember those things, when you go to the sword dealer in the dealer room and he shows you something, if it has those things, it's at least something that will get you through the first wave in your video game attack of zombies. And once you get to that point, those swords are going to start somewhere around $150. There's one out there called the Musashi blade that comes in a little styrofoam thing that you have to put it together. And those will run between $90 and $180, and they will pass all five of these qualifications. They're a little bit lightweight for use on cutting straw targets. If you're actually interested in buying a blade and you're at a convention with me, come talk to me. You don't want a blade that's just going to pass those five. You want a blade that will survive a mistake. You know what I mean? You don't buy a Porsche for your son's first car. You buy something that will survive parking lots and things like that. And sword combat's the same way. Your angle isn't always going to be perfect. And I watched a 305-pound samurai instructor at a cutting competition take a wide stance and do a diagonal cut. That's not normally how you fight, but apparently that's how he cuts. And went, oh, wham! He didn't just hit the pin, he hit the 4x4 post coming up. I did that once with a sword that was handmade for me because my sword maker guaranteed I couldn't break it. So I tried to slam it into the floor and I cut the post in half. It cut into it and then it just shattered. This blade didn't. It was a reproduction blade. Hit it and it went through the pin, hit the 4x4, and the blade snapped off and flew out into the audience. Didn't hit anybody. And I don't use swords like that, so please come to my stage show tomorrow. I'm going to sacrifice a virgin. It'll only be Saturday. We can find one. Why did you look at her? All right. You guys are awesome. If you are interested in anything else, we have DVDs for sale in the hallway. I will sign them. I'll sign almost anything, but I draw the line at butt cracks. Don't ask. It happened more than once. I'm not doing it. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. Enjoy the convention. Yeah, and if it's a decoration, again, it's fine.
Trying to sell for like $300-400. And like his decoration blades are $100.
Reason why it gets banned.
Wait, two questions. There was one person that was actually banned from ASEAN for 10 years. How can a person get banned from ASEAN for 10 years?
Lying
Oh,
and arguing because they made up a story, they got a guest fired, and then the story turned out to be false. So that's how.
yeah, and number two,
I never said anything.
And number two, you want me to add some of these things out from this video.
I'm joking.
Oh, I see. That may...
I'm joking.
I know.
I don't always make completely appropriate comments, but I will stand behind every point that I make and everything I say.
I see. Because we run videos uncensored and unedited at the Ministry of Otaku. I actually got a YouTube.
That works. That works.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, too, if I told you I apologize, my stuff.